Hi, my name is Katie New, and I'm going to be talking to you today about Black male student leadership development at Central Michigan University, which is a predominantly white institution. This is for EDL 757's my student development theory course. So the purpose for my study was to explore a population with which I was not familiar. I have not done extensive research to this point on Black male student development theory, especially looking at the leadership aspect. So that was something that I was really interested in exploring. I also wanted to be able to facilitate some of the dialogue across difference initiatives that are happening and maintaining on our campus. Really wanted to be able to push myself to be able to have those different conversations about dialogue across difference to be able to gain more of an understanding. We've learned a lot in my student development theory class this year and this semester about making sure that we're understanding different perspectives of where individuals are coming from. So where I could have had the opportunity to explore someone of a very similar, a population of a similar identity as me, I decided to go the alternative route and explore African American male student leadership on campus. And then also because I am working for the Leadership Safari program at Central Michigan University, so I was interested in seeing the relationship between Leadership Safari and Impact, which is our orientation program for multicultural students that come to Central Michigan University that has just evolved in the past 3 years. So hopefully this research will inform how we can bring both programs together to make an inclusive program for all of our students that are coming in at the same time without exhausting them 7 days before school starts. The population that I chose to explore in the 3 interviews that I had were 3 undergraduate individuals. It's important to note that they did not self-identify as leaders. So these students were identified by positional leaders that saw leadership potential in them or recognized them as student leaders in graduate assistants. So I did get the assistance of some of my cohort members to recruit and retain these interviews for the purpose of this study. So the framework in which I decided to conduct these interviews was an initial conversation that I had had with one of my cohort mates, who is the leader of one of the predominantly Black student leadership organizations on campus called Men About Change. We had a really enriching conversation about the different programs that he was doing and initiatives that he was taking, and really the development that his students were having over the course of the year and the semester. So I was really interested in interviewing some of those students. So he had the initial conversation with those students, and then I was able to reach out via email. I had 11 targeted questions with one open-ended question, ending in a face-to-face interview. It's important to note that not all of these students were from the Men About Change organization, and they were some of the students that I interviewed did identify with other leadership organizations on campus. So the theories that I focused on when I was conducting my theory, the historical theories that were already in place, were Wren's ecological theory of mixed race identity. While I recognize that that is not a historically Black racial identity theory, it did link to what I was exploring as far as how Wren talks about Grafenbrenner and the ecological theory and the importance of microsystems in peers and mentors, and then also the impact on college of these collegians. So, and how important it is for that collegiate experience, how much that can impact student development. So also in that examining Grafenbrenner's ecological theory, really pulling on that microsystem aspect of peers, mentors, and that close-knit group of people that are interacting with this individual to help them gain that development. And then also Cross and Fagan-Smith's model of Black identity development, specifically Sector 4 and early adulthood, as that is the specific time frame in which I decided to examine this population. Again, my study was very much focused on not as much the longitudinal aspect of Black male identity student leadership development, but really how college and their family and where they came from maybe could inform their student development in college specifically, especially at a predominantly white institution being Central Michigan University. So what I came to was the 7 layers of black male leadership development at Central Michigan University. You can see here that it starts, and I'll go through each of these 7 layers in more depth, but very much a flow chart and a layered piece. So not formatted in a stage theory, but very much layers of experiences that these students are having as they develop their leadership identity and their identity within themselves as a student leader. Again, these students were not, they did not necessarily self-identify as leaders to begin with. So we'll get into the 7 layers. The first layer being that each of these students identified that they had a very strong family dynamic. So a strong, supportive family dynamic, meaning that whoever their caretakers were, those first influencers, I would like to call them, they were very supportive of them gaining higher education opportunities and gaining those leadership roles. It's important to note that these students, while they did have a family dynamic that was supportive, strong, and sincere, they were not like denounced to society's views of where they grew up and if they were going to succeed or not. That was very much a trend in where they grew up and the identity that they held, whether or not they were going to be able to succeed in a collegiate space. So going from the family dynamic, there was very much feelings of acceptance as we lean into the next layer, which is exposure. So as they were gaining these acceptance letters and gaining that approval of family, like acceptance into college and recognizing that they could do it, those feelings of acceptance then pour over into this exposure layer where they were, as they entered into their collegiate search and as they were going through high school, they were exposed to Central Michigan University in one way or another, whether that was through a program in Gear Up, was specifically mentioned, or programs such as the Pathways program, or a program as far as the Leadership Institute was concerned, in going to these individuals' high schools and doing leadership programming. There was a specific program or black male student in a position of leadership, for example, that led them on a tour that gave them that bridge to be able to see CMU as a place that they could identify with and they could excel in. If they were able to come to this predominantly white institution, they could succeed as a leader. So that in this layer, they're feelings of value, feeling that they are valued as this black student leader, and they are able to really excel as they've seen other people excel that shared their identity at Central Michigan University. The third layer is leadership. So this is where it breaks into 2 separate kind of categories. So either these students self-identified as a leader, or someone identified that they had leadership potential. So if they self-identified as a leader, a lot of the times that stemmed from their family or high school experience or a prior mentor. So this was nothing that really, while they were exposed to these programs prior to coming to Central Michigan University, and that's how they got here, they didn't necessarily have someone at Central that they really plugged into right away. They identified as a leader. They saw themselves as a leader already, maybe because of prior experiences. So that is how they identified as a leader. On the other hand, some of the students did not identify as a leader, but recognized that they had leadership potential. So a college mentor or an established black male leader reached out to them and told them that they had this feeling of that they could be a leader. And in that, they felt feelings of support. They really felt that they could excel in these roles. They felt supported, whether they felt they identified with that leadership role to begin with or not. They felt that feeling of support. Then we get into motivators. So this is the next layer, kind of talks about whether or not, if they self-identified as a leader, then they again went out and found those programs and opportunities to advance their leadership agenda. So they went out and found programs and opportunities that would then enhance their leadership agenda. the mentor role is still a key piece of that, and they still identify very much with having a mentor, and especially someone that they would identify as a successful Black leader, male or female, doesn't matter. They definitely supported them in getting there, but they didn't need those people to be able to inform them about these different opportunities. If they did not self-identify as a leader already, then that mentorship role was super, super key in getting them involved in programs and opportunities that were available to them. So a mentor specifically told them, hey, I think that you will be really great in this opportunity, or I think that you really should go for this leadership role or really get involved in this program. So let's get you involved in it. So then they were able to get involved in those programs and opportunities. This also, we'll talk about this later, informs how this mentor continues to be a really prevalent role for these students that didn't self-identify as a leader originally. So after that leadership development is kind of getting going, adversity was faced in some way, shape, or form with these students. So the different types of adversity faced directly correlated with the types of programs and people experiences that they were exposed to. I found that this was very interesting because if the students had been exposed to programs or experiences that were stereotypically like Black programs or Black leadership programs, they didn't really face adversity in the category of racial discrimination or racism. If they did not necessarily get involved or were involved with programs that were historically Black or involve students that were identified in the same area that they did, then they oftentimes the adversity that was faced was in regards to schoolwork or family, nothing that had to do with racial discrimination or racism. So I thought that that was really interesting as I was conducting these interviews, that the students that had that kind of feeling of belonging in their organizations, those students didn't really face racial discrimination. Obvious feelings of helplessness are represented in this phase. So the different coping methods, if they had, they either could have coped internally and leaned on family, or coped utilizing those mentors and peers that they had established relationships with earlier. Typically, there was, and what I saw that was that if they had established that peer mentor relationship as they were getting involved in the programs, again going back to whether or not they self-identified as a leader, they would often lean on those mentors or peers as they were going through and coping with these things. If they didn't really if they self-identified as a leader and didn't really have those mentors or peers that were prevalent in their life at that point, they often reflected and fell back on their family dynamic, going back to that strong family unit, or just dealt with it internally and just rose above it in their terms. This ultimately leads to loyalty being the final and last layer, meaning they had this altruistic feeling and sense of loyalty to the programs of the people that got them where they were, and also that this feeling that they were going to change the world. It was really inspirational to be able to talk to these students because they felt that whatever program brought them there, whether or not it was with students that they identified with or not, whether they had mentors or didn't, the different adversities that they faced, all of them felt that the programs that they were involved with were very, very important, and that being involved in those programs would help them change the world in some way, shape, or form. So that was really awesome, that altruistic feeling, and that they were going to go out there and just kick butt. So then again, it goes back to the different kind of flow chart through the 7 layers. Obvious limitations of this are that it is a very narrow scope. It's very specific as it's looking at Black male student leaders at Central Michigan University. Again, I had a very small pool of interviewees, being that I only interviewed 3 people, and it was not representative of the lifespan whatsoever, very much looking at a collegiate experience and leadership, and I did not cross-examine other students that did not identify as leaders as well. And finally, the implications of what I've researched is that recognizing the role of family, that it plays a super crucial role to these students, that mentorship is essential, intentional conversations that these students are able to be leaders, and then opportunities for dialogue and acknowledging that the societal impact definitely is there and